OEG Voices.
OEG Voices.
OEG Voices.
OEG Voices.
A podcast bringing you the voices and ideas of open educators from around the world.
OEG Voices is produced by Open Education Global,
a member-based non-profit organization
supporting the development and use of open education globally.
Learn more about us at oeglobal.org.
There's much to take in at a global level.
We hope to bring you closer to how open education is working
by hearing the stories of practitioners
told in their own voices.
Each episode introduces you to a global open educator,
and we invite you to later engage in a conversation with them
in our OEG Connect community.
Hello, and this is another OEG Voices podcast, and I'm your host with my finger on the record button from Open Education Global. I'm Alan Levine, and I'm excited here to have a conversation with two colleagues I've overlapped in for a long time. I think both Doug and Laura are people I can't even exactly pinpoint when we just seem to always be on each other's blog posts, and we have some connections through Mozilla and MozFest, which was actually probably one of my pinnacle conference experiences. So, and I really wanted to bring to you Doug Belshaw and Laura Hilliger, because they work totally in openness, but kind of in a different frame than our clients and members in higher education. But I think there's a lot of things that they have to teach us about open working, and they even work in an open co-op model, which I really want to dig into to understand and share how it works, but more about the principles. So first, I want to say hello to Doug and Laura. And I think because Doug talks a lot, I'm going to ask Laura to introduce herself first. And you can see I am not very serious. These are good friends, and they know my little sarcasm.
Well, Doug does talk a lot. That's just fact. I'm just kidding. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Alan, for inviting us. I am Laura Hilliger, and I'm about to record my own podcast intro. I was just about to, we also have a podcast, and when I say I am Laura Hilliger, and then I just want to say our tagline too. Yeah, like Alan said, I've been working in the space between open source technology and nonprofits most of my career. So actually open education is sort of that in-between intersect point that I sort of started in. So I was at the beginning of my career really sort of straddling the boundary between technology and education with everything that I did. And nowadays, well, I kind of think that education is in everything. So even though some of our clients are not directly educational projects, there's still a lot of teaching and learning that goes into what we do. And openness just underpins all of it. So really happy to be here.
Well, thank you. And first of all, where exactly are you? Because we like to put people on the map.
I am in Dresden, Germany, which is about an hour and a half south of Berlin.
Excellent.
Hence the accent.
See why we get along,
I'm an
Doug?
expat.
So I was trying to remember when we were in that tiny little pub together, Alan. And I think it was probably the first time I met you in real life.
I think
at that MozFest.
I think, or it might have been, I had an earlier tour through England, something that Martin Weller hooked up, and I was in London for a while. So it may have been that, but it could have been at MozFest. But
literally 9-10 years ago. So it's been a while. But yeah, I have worked in higher education before, although I managed to escape. I worked in schools before that. And set up a co-op with Laura after we left Mozilla, and I've done some work with Moodle. But yeah, these days work full-time through the co-op. I'm in the northeast of England, basically as far north as you can go before you get to Scotland. Yeah, we get to do cool stuff with interesting people working remotely and traveling when the pandemic lets us, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm very pleased to be on this podcast, because I think some people listening might be interested in the cooperative model. Some people might be interested in some of the stuff we talk about. And also, I would love it if someone was listening who I've had a conversation, or Laura's had a conversation before at a conference, and we've kind of fallen off their radar a bit. So it'd be good to kind of reconnect with people after this pandemic pause.
Yeah, let's hope that happens. First, tell us about, I almost said, wow, but tell us about We Are Open, because I think it says it all. And that's the name of, it is a business, but it's run in a cooperative model. Like, how did you come to want to set this up, and how does it work?
Well, the way that we came to it was it's kind of interesting. What we felt like we needed at the time, and actually something that I still need today, is sort of solidarity between independent workers. So at the time when we formed the co-op, the founding members were all working on their own. So not for big organizations. It was after Mozilla time, and it was sort of in between my working with Mozilla and my working with Greenpeace. And there was just this in-between time where we realized that having a little bit of solidarity between quote unquote freelancers might be beneficial. And our colleague John is a crazy radical from back in the day, and was really interested in the UK cooperative space. And he was we worked with him also at Mozilla. And so we started to sort of explore what would it look like if we actually worked together through this vehicle that is a cooperative.
And there's 4 of us in the co-op at the moment. So there's Brian Mothers, whose work lots of people listening to this will be aware of. Laura, myself, and John, who's just been mentioned. And also we collaborate with different people. And I mean, we had to create a co-op where there's no one in charge, because can you imagine Laura being my boss? It would just be horrendous. So it's been it'll be 7 years in May, and we just get to kind of do some cool stuff. So what are some of the people that we worked with before? Well, we've worked with people like Greenpeace, with tech companies, with nonprofits, and all different kinds of people doing community work, doing courses, helping them work more openly, like Sport England at the moment. They've got lots of different bodies that look after like Basketball England and Hockey England, and they don't work together really. And so we're helping them work together and kind of share data and share ideas and approaches, and just take those first steps that lots of people listening to this will just take for granted, but actually are really needed to open up organizations.
This is the taking for granted, I think, is really interesting, because I last week I published a post that was literally copying and pasting some stuff that Doug had somewhere. And I called it 5 practical tips to working openly. And it was like tips like, take notes in meetings. And it was so basic. And I just threw it all into a post really quickly, just to sort of say what we have been doing with Sport England and what kind of really basic tips. And I didn't think anything of it. And now it's being shared over and over and over again. So I think these really basic things that open educators take for granted are things that they just don't think about. And so us documenting them and sharing them in a way that is easily accessible, important to remember those kind of basics.
And I was one who read the post and shared it with my colleagues.
Really?
So that's how things get around. So are organizations coming to you with the interest in openness, or are they coming to you because of the reputation, or because you've had the success with other client or other orgs that they know about? Or what do they first say when they say we want to work with We Are Open?
It's really a mixed bag. Go ahead, Doug.
No, I was going to say exactly the same thing. I think there's 3 different routes in. There's, yes, come and help us be more open. But then there's we know your work, Laura, and we'd like to work with you. And, oh, you've got a co-op as well. Great. The network kind of thing. And then we've done, especially during the pandemic and stuff, we've had funding to work with network organizations who they recognize that, for the Sport England example, we worked with Catalyst, who were giving out money during the pandemic to help people upskill. And part of that is, well, what's even possible, and, open source tools and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's the network level that has the insight. So yes, some people definitely do come to us saying we'd like to work more openly, but equally, just like any kind of organization of people who have got specific talents and abilities around learning and technology and community, we get to do other stuff as well, not just all open stuff. Sorry, Laura, what were you going to say?
No, I was just kind of reflecting on the different avenues that that clients come in from. And I think one of the things that we do quite actively is we promote open working. So we do get clients come in that, that want to kind of be a little bit closed down, and we take it upon ourselves to sort of push our clients towards being more open. So we very rarely take on projects where we can't be completely open. We do have some, but most of them, we go into it saying, okay, but we're going to want to write about this on the internet. We're going to want to talk about it. We don't want to, we want to be open by default. And this is really important for us because we've been involved in openness so long. It's actually hard to not be open about things.
There's times when you have the ability to make quite like little changes which have profound impact. So, for example, client comes towards you, gives you a standard form. It could be a non-disclosure agreement. That's quite rare, but it could be just an agreement for how you're going to work together. And instead of just saying, yes, we agree to that, the bit where it usually says like all rights reserved, we have all the copyright, all that kind of stuff, we just push back and say, we'd like to change this bit to be, we usually work under this Creative Commons license, yada, yada, yada. And no one has ever said no to that, which is really interesting. It just shows how much of it is just boilerplate text. But people use that to back up kind of crazy claims about what you can and can't do with stuff. So if you make that very clear from the get-go, and be more open with the stuff that you're doing, it kind of sets the relationship as you go along. And actually, Alan, you've been part of one of the communities that we helped set up recently. So in the last year, we've been working with Participate around a project called Keep Badges Weird. And, you've popped up in that community. I've popped up in the OEG community. And those kind of community of practice places are really important to us because that's how people's minds get changed around things like open working and the importance of community and, just getting out of that very hierarchical, top-down command and control mindset, I think.
And I'm glad you brought up because I wanted to ask you more about this work with Open Participate. And well, first of all, I love that you named it Keep Badges Weird. I want to hear that story. But also about the whole like arc, because, Doug, you've been involved with the Open Badges from the inception at Mozilla. But now describe about like what you're framing it now as sort of open recognition, which seems to be a bit more broader and appealing to people.
Well, Laura's been involved in Open Badges since the start as well. In fact, even before me, because she was in Barcelona in 2010 when the first conversation happened. So Laura predates me. But yeah, Laura, what happened? We kind of went to Participate and said, we've got this idea for an email course around badges. And it kind of just, through conversations, mushed into something else. But I can't remember that exact start of it, Laura. How did that happen?
Well, I know that Keep Badges Weird was our code name. We didn't know what we were calling this work that we were doing. So We Are Open went to Participate. We've worked with them before. They sponsored the spin up of Badge Wiki back in the day, and they're just awesome. And we had this idea to do like a kind of a basic email course around open badges, just something free and open that, people could dip their toes into the world of open badges in a structured way. And like Doug said, this kind of mushroomed out. But while it was mushrooming, we had the code name Keep Badges Weird, and we just ran with it. We just kept going. So that's where the name came from.
And the interesting thing is that it resonates with lots of people. So there's 350 people, whatever it is, in that community now. And we've been looking into the data and the way that people have engaged with that. But there is a significant subset of that who have a problem for different reasons. Sometimes it's culturally, sometimes it's to do with the organization they work in or whatever, but the weird part of it. So we're kind of just thinking about, like, do we keep it like that? Do we kind of pivot more towards open recognition? We want to do more stuff which is outside of just kind of straight up educational circles. So we started exploring stuff with the workplace. But I think that particular project, especially if you're listening to this and you work in a higher education institution or that kind of thing, it's very much a partnership between, yes, they're, Participate are paying us to do this work, but very much a partnership between the two organizations trying to make that whole space like better. And I think that's where the interesting work happens. There's plenty of work for agencies who, want to build websites or run this community the way that this hierarchical organization tells you to. But the work that we do is always in partnership with organizations, and we turn stuff down, either because of capacity issues or also because it's not really a very good fit. Like we would never work with straight up oil company, for example. Like we have our list of ethics and that kind of stuff, but also we just sometimes laugh if organizations who are so out of whack with our principles and the way that we work even suggest working with us, which is a nice space to be in.
And that has happened. like someone's come to you, like not really understanding who you are or your principles.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Like an investment bank, and not rude, but at the same time, we try and make sure they understand that we're not just another agency.
Like there's a shop that down the road called We Are Closed, right?
Exactly.
But I liked how you because the community building part is fascinating to me, and that you have that active community in the Keep Badges Weird. It gets me thinking a lot about when you talk about the fact that it popped up on my radar because I read your blog and I know your work. I get Laura's, email newsletters, and I always wander off to the links. Yeah, no, I appreciate them. But sometimes the thinking, and it kind of goes into the drama of Twitter and Mastodon, of thinking that it's one place, and really it's all these overlapping connections. Because I know that one of your active community members is one of our active ones, Alex Enkerly, who's just a gem, and he's so generous, and he's one of those bridger people that you really need. And so I wonder and then you've written quite a few things that are useful about sort of the arc of growth of communities, and how much is it what you architect, and how much is it what you kind of let go and happen?
That is a really good question, because I think a lot of people think that if you just build the space for people to show up to, then people will show up. But that's not actually how it works. There is architecture behind a successful community of practice, and there are people who promote the principles and values of that community and work to network people together and, try to have it be a fun, welcoming space, or welcoming at least, maybe not always fun, depending on how serious a particular community is. Like activist communities might not necessarily be what I would call as fun, but they're organizing around a particular set of ideals, and that is architected. But if it is too strong arm architected, if the moderation of the community or the organization who's running the community, funding the community, sort of tries to put in too much structure, or doesn't pay attention to what people in the community are actually doing, then that can stifle it as well. So it is really, for me, community building is definitely a balancing act between providing structure for people so that they have a place that they can engage, and letting go of structure so that engagement, regardless of what it is something that furthers the community.
I think that OEG Connect's a good example of that. So I see you every Monday posting stuff, the pulse, you've got a question. It's not, what's your favorite color? It's relevant to that particular audience and that community, and it gets people being able to share what they know and what they're interested in and stuff. We've been working on. So one thing we haven't mentioned is that we work with other cooperatives, and there's the 7 international principles of cooperation, which we have in our articles of incorporation. And one of those, Principle 6, is solidarity and cooperation amongst co-ops. And the idea is that you're trying to build the cooperative economy by working with similar organizations. So one of those that we worked with recently, called Common Knowledge, Alex from Common Knowledge shared this book, which I'm just showing Alan, and it's Buzzing Communities, How to Build Bigger, Better, and More Active Online Communities by Richard Millington. This book is 10 years old, but building communities online has been going around for ages. Howard Rheingold, yourself, Alan, other people. And what it does a great job at, I think, even though some of the screenshots are oh my goodness, is that what the web was like? It kind of talks about the ways in which people interact with each other. and the kinds of things you should encourage and the things you shouldn't, and the data, and exactly the things that you're doing in the community, the kind of things that you probably just do naturally just from your experience. If people aren't used to that, that book, and I think there's a follow-up as well, is a really good place to kind of just delve into, the stuff that I'm doing just naturally. Is that a good thing to do? Should I step in? Should I step back? All that kind of stuff.
I actually don't know what the heck I'm doing. I've been working. It was one of the things that was asked of me when I joined OE Global was to create a community space to have a place for people to connect and collaborate between the events that we do. And I've been trying everything for a while, and just you get a little bit of traction, and we used it to run sort of like our online conferences, and then adjuncts to an in-person conference. And it was good, but something just kind of clicked in the last couple of weeks, and I can't really say what it was, whether it was kind of this burst of interest, anger about the Fediverse, and then there was some, but there's also some, positive news. We share our awards, but it's really hard. And I've always tried to say, it takes way longer than you think it will for it to get that momentum. And I don't think I'm there yet. So I've been trying a lot of different things. And, the most important are those key people like Alex, and I could rattle off my I give out a discourse badge. I call them extraordinary, and that's funny. It's not like a real badge. It's just the thing that the discourse platform does, and I'm surprised what it means to people. I mean, because to me it's it's like a like button, but it's even those small bits of recognition that seem to matter to people. But I'm making this up as I go. And
yeah, because you've issued me the Fediverse Pioneer badge. And maybe we should talk, Laura. Maybe we should talk about the badges that we've got on the Keep Badges Away community, because you'd expect some decent badges, right, on a community which literally talks about communities of practice and badges. So what we got, Laura? What we got?
I mean, I think it's really interesting, because a lot of the badges that we have in Keep Badges Weird just came up kind of organically. We responded to what people were doing. And said, "Ooh, that is a behavior that I would like to recognize." So we have some quite funny ones. One of the everyone's favorite, I think, is the Hofmeister badge, which is a little illustration from our colleague Brian Mathers of David Hasselhoff holding that rescue bubble. I don't know what those are called in swimming. I should, but I don't. The little rescue. The red thing they had in Baywatch. And we give that badge to people when when they have come into a conversation and helped that conversation take a positive turn. So rescuing the conversation from maybe rabbit holing or from getting negative or something like that. So that's one of my favorites. But we also have badges for people who keep the peace. For people who start conversations, we award a badge for people who have just taken the step at introducing themselves. So we have some of
badge,
the. Yeah, that's the first badge. Exactly. I was just going to say we have badges that are really focused on community values, and then we have stealth badges that are sort of marking pro-social behaviors that we think makes the community have a nice vibe.
I think one time, this guy, Stephen Downs, he wrote something once that was a little bit stingy. So I made a special badge that is only awarded to Stephen Downs. But
you're not talking about the putting Downs badge, which as far as okay.
So they're common. I've seen a few variants in other systems. So
yeah, there's a badge in the Keep Badges Weird community that is awarded to people who have been quote unquote put down by Stephen Downs.
Yes, I call it
putting you down. Yeah. But it's worth because people often, maybe especially if you work in academia, you might have been exposed to badges in the early days, and anytime you're exposed to something quite early in the maturity of something, you kind of think you know it, and then it evolves and changes, and then you see it again, and you have to kind of revisit your previous opinion. Yeah. So one of the things that we've learned over the last 10 years of badges is that the motivation for why it is that you want to earn a badge is kind of important. So as Laura said there's badges that you are working towards because you can see them. There's stealth badges that you don't know that you can earn, are just kind of like given to you in a kind of a secret way. We've also learned that if you go to an event and you're literally issued like the patch, the so-on patch of a badge that you've earned, that's a really powerful thing. And also just kind of, as Laura said, Don Poissant on one of our community calls recently used the metaphor of a seagull swooping in, making lots of edits to a wiki, and then swooping out again. So one of the badges that we're working on at the moment is the Seagull Swooper badge for a flurry of activity. And some of them are serious and some are fun. And we're just trying to, as Laura said, get those pro-social behaviors to try and almost like encourage the kinds of things that make communities great and discourage the things which don't. And that might be quite a nice bridge to some of the things you just mentioned there about the Fediverse and how like algorithms versus people, different instances, how you can get people to act in ways which are more positive than negative, that kind of thing.
Well, we could talk about it because I mean, you've been inspirational. I mean, you've advocated, but you've actually you've created and you've shared things such as the rules of conduct that you created for an instance you developed, and I'm wondering, like, it feels like this has some momentum. Like, is it going to stick? Like, is this gonna like get us to a period of change the way we go about our online, whatever we used to do in Twitter?
What do you think, Laura? As someone who had a Mastodon account, 2017, and then has kind of been posting a few things, then come back a bit more recently.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not a good case study because I sort of have been backing away from all social media for a number of years. But yes, I have been on the Fediverse for, I guess 2016, 2017, joined Mastodon Social, and now everybody wants me to move to a different server. And I'm like, but I was here first. Although I do understand why different instances, and it's good to sign up to, smaller servers for reasons. But as far as like, is it going to stick? Is it going to become mainstream? How is this going to impact the internet? I think that's kind of what a lot of us are asking ourselves. What is that? What is it going to look like when actually social media really is decentralized? And I have some theories, but I don't, I don't really have a clear understanding or view about what mainstream, I just did air quotes for mainstream, mainstream social media users are like, what they're going to do. Because one of the things about social media for years and years and years has been like behavioral economics. Those Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, those tools are designed to have people act a certain way and to have them value things that certain kinds of things like attention. And the Fediverse doesn't work like that. Mastodon, as a short form blogging platform, doesn't care about attention and doesn't reward you for having more attention. So I think it's interesting to sort of like, I wonder, what does it really mean for society? Does it mean that people are going to stop caring what Ranto on the internet thinks? I don't think that that's a change that's going to come very quickly, because I think that the behavioral economics of social media platforms were based on capitalism anyway. So yeah, but it is a ripe rabbit hole for philosophical discussion on how we as human beings behave, for sure. What do you think, Doug?
Well, so all of us three were on Twitter in the early days, like 2007. Yeah. And what has been amazing to me has been seeing how people, so I blocked the word Twitter on the Fediverse on Mastodon because I can't deal with people being giddy about not having an algorithm anymore. Like, it was fun at first. But what I saw when people were kind of reflecting on their experience and kind of comparing the two was that people who maybe didn't sign up to Twitter until 2013, 2015, 2017, being amazed that clicking a like button or a favorite button had no impact on what they saw. Literally, it was just, Alan posts something, I favored it, I get to press the button, Alan gets to see I press the button. That's it. Which it was in the early days of Twitter. So for me, that's not amazing. But for other people, it's like, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. And I think there's lots of hand-wringing going on. I think there's lots of people making grand pronouncements about what it means for society and, this and that and whatever. I don't particularly want Mastodon to go mainstream. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, because it would mean I have to go get out of there quickly. I remember seeing a bumper sticker years ago saying, if you're not on the edge, you're taking up too much room or something like that. That stuck with me in terms of like my career and innovation and stuff, chase the weird stuff. But secondly, Mastodon, as people are probably sick of me saying, Mastodon is not the Fediverse. Mastodon is one. It's like saying, oh, are you on Gmail when actually you mean email? Like it's one part of it. So I'm experimenting with PixelFed, which is a bit like Instagram. So I'm admin of exercise.cafe, where there's, 40 people who are sharing updates about exercise and fitness and that kind of thing. And then we've got a test instance of something called Miski, which is Japanese, with all of its like difference. I haven't been to Japan. I think you two both have. It's supposed to be a massive culture shock when you do, and it's kind of a little bit like that with the software as well. It's quite different from Western software. It's still a microblogging platform, but it has loads of different additional features you could turn on and off. It's got like a little anime girl for the 404 message. All this stuff going on. So I'm testing out that. And I just want to keep everything, I want to keep everything weird. I want to like push things a little bit so that we know what's coming next and what shouldn't come next and give the critique of that. Because as we know, there's a vanguard of people who get to set the norms for who comes next. And we had that with Twitter. Unfortunately, that got corrupted when they had their IPO and they then had shareholders. But if we can create spaces for people to come into, which have got space for pro-social behaviors, got appropriate technologies, I guess that's what we're trying to do. Which sounds a bit ambitious, but hey, you've got to have goals in life, eh?
But I don't. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
No, I'm gonna say.
I was just gonna respond with like I think it's interesting because those of us who have been involved in open education for years and years, or open source or open technology, like there was always a particular kind of ambition with decentralizing and democratizing technology and our spaces. And like, I feel like we've a little bit lost in terms of the internet, because the internet is built on open standards, right? Like the idea was that it would be decentralized and that it would be democratized. And then, some of these big corporate tech firms came along and they've managed to like piece by piece close it down. And that's the same, that's those of us who are riding the edge of innovation, or however you frame that. I think it has more to do with curiosity and boredom than wanting to be cutting edge or something. We've always kind of seen that like the more we can use technology to actually interact with our communities, with other people, and on the individual basis, on community basis, communities of practice, this kind of stuff. That personally, the happier I am. Like I'm a lot happier interacting with real people in real communities than I am interacting with the algorithm. So.
And I completely lost my point, and it was pointless. But I think one and two, like it seems like when you're in the middle, or at least listening to some of these discussions, you kind of forget that the majority of people don't even know about it and probably don't care too much. But that also means it's sort of an opportunity for them to like start anew without all this baggage of what happened before. And so like we want to create the avenues for people who don't even understand this stuff to get that sense of excitement. At least that's what I'm optimistic for. I also want to say, like we mentioned, I'm envious that you get to work with Brian Mathers. Like, he did a little bit. We use this remixer for a couple of our things, and obviously, like as soon as you see like someone's project and that they're using Brian's work, and that's a real crowning achievement. So, say hello to Brian for me. I can't respect him enough. I thought maybe to circle a little bit back about kind of like important differences or similarities to working with the range of clients that you do, as like, what can people in education learn about the way that organizations and charities and interest groups who are outside kind of this institutional box, what lessons are there to learn, or what's the same?
So yeah, I've worked in, if you think about how hierarchical schools are, both for kids and for the staff there, and universities to some extent, although you get a bit more academic freedom. I worked for JISC in the UK, which some people will be aware of. You should mention at this point, we've got a site called learnwith.weareopen.coop. So learnwith.weareopen.coop. And on that site, we have got some email courses. This is what we were planning to build with open badges for Participate. So there's the most recent one is Feminism is for Everybody, especially educators, as well as how to, am I allowed to swear on the radio on this?
Of course.
Podcast?
Yeah.
How to unfuck your organization. And then we've got what we talk about when we talk about open, and the 7 habits of highly successful online meetings. And so that just takes you through like what it is to actually work openly, because a lot of the time when we talk to people, when we've been brought in, people think that they work openly, and we're not saying that we have the last word on it, but really it doesn't take much of a push for people to realize, oh yeah, we really don't work very openly. The feminism stuff has really opened my eyes as a straight white middle-aged male. That's been that kind of work. And I guess if you work in a hierarchical organization, which is most people, the ability to have the agency isn't the agency that we have in an organization that we've set up ourselves and we co-own. You're never going to be able to get that level of agency in a hierarchical organization. But I think sometimes people hide their light under a bushel a little bit, and they need to think about their job descriptions not as a box to be contained within, but a box to kind of stand up on top of. Not in the sense of like doing more work, but more like you've been hired to do a role and be the biggest version of that you can possibly be, and try and make as much change as you can in the world. And sometimes that means blowing up processes which are entirely fine and like average and okay and replacing them with something which is awesome, but also takes a while to get there. One thing that I like showing some of our clients is something called the sigmoid curve. I remember doing this earlier this year with one of our clients. And the sigmoid curve, I came across at Cramlington Learning Village, just up the road from me. And Cramlington Learning Village had this amazing kind of approach to pedagogy and everything like that. I wish I could have sent my kids there. And they just basically said, you have to start off doing innovation before things start to decline. Everything has like an arc to it, like a tennis ball being served over a net. And you have to like push on to the next thing before you start your decline. And when you start that next thing, there's going to be a little bit of awkwardness and pushback. So actually things will get a little bit weird, not as productive for a while, but that's so you can move on to the next level. It's like an S-shaped curve. And that's always stuck with me, even since I started about 15 years ago, because that's a hard thing to do with clients in any organization, trying to say there's going to be a little bit of awkwardness and weirdness while we do this innovation work, but then you're going to open up these massive opportunities to do some amazing, amazing things.
Yeah, this it's interesting. There's an advocacy model that's based on the same curve called the 2 loops model from the Berkana Institute, which is something that we've looked at through the lens of open badges just this year. So looking at how do you actually create system change? And as Doug was just saying there, when you begin to innovate a new system, you can actually impact an old system. And creating change doesn't mean, destroying the old system, but rather providing an alternative that people can see themselves inside. Because if you don't have the alternative, then it's really hard to imagine how can the world possibly exist without system X. And so, we've been looking a bit into how a system change actually works. And that model is really interesting because it uses a language of putting an old system in hospice, which is quite compassionate and kind, and taking it like understanding and really just understanding that people inside of a system need a place to be. They need a system to be inside of. And so instead of just saying, we're going to dismantle everything and smash it all to the ground, actually being prepared to say, and this is where you can go when that starts to happen. It just makes people feel safe. And it helps you actually create real change in the world because people don't hold on to the old system because they have nothing else to grab onto.
And I think what you just said there is extremely important, because when you just stand for opposing the current system without standing for something else, then exactly what Laura said, how am I supposed to act in the world if I'm just being negative about the current system? Like, you have to stand for something, which is why I think the communities like OEG Connect and Keep Badges Weird and all these places, they're giving a new space for people to say, well, these are my tribe. And these are the things which we stand for, and these are the kind of behaviors I want to engage in. And I think you should question everything. I mean, Laura and I were talking about the fact that, I do about 25 hours paid work a week. I do loads of other stuff, but where does the 40-hour week come from? Like, who decided that? Because 40 hours, if you went back 100, 150 years, wouldn't even seem like very much. Yet today we see it as quite a lot. And I think you should question everything and try and design your life and the way that you work in the organization that you're in without the constraints that you've currently got, and just think about what it is you want to do. And it might be that actually the work that you need to do, it can't be done in the organization that you're in just because of the current constraints that you've got. And so you need to move out somewhere else. And that's a scary thing, especially if you decide that actually I need to set up my own organization to do this. That's quite a big step.
I was just going to try to loop back to a question that sort of kicked off this bit of conversation, and thinking about what people can do inside of higher education institutions or other organizations. And I think what Doug just said there about questioning constraints, I think one of the things that we don't tend to question is some of the social norms that we're brought up to understand. So the idea of having a boss, which is something that at the co-op we make fun of, this idea of having a boss. Like, somebody is going to boss you, a full-grown adult, around and tell you what to do. And we know that that's not what good leadership looks like, or a good manager. You've heard the phrase that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. We know what good leadership looks like, and good leadership looks like, the boss treating their subordinates, which is also a language that we shouldn't be using, in a way that respects their self-autonomy and their individual, what they can actually bring to the table. Like, people have different skills and competencies, they have different talents. And so questioning those social norms around hierarchy inside of higher education institutions is really important, because we are not perfect. Our societies aren't perfect, and there's always room for improvement.
And I think that's why communities of practice are particularly interesting, because where's the hierarchy in a community of practice? Yes, there's people who step up like yourself, Alan, and like we do, and kind of feed the community. And it's almost, I don't want to use servant leadership because Laura's critiqued that recently, and I don't want to say those words anymore. But it's doing things on behalf of the community. It's helping one another. And yes, there are always, in a group of people sort themselves out into some kind of order. But when I try and explain cooperativism to people, it's like, well, Laura leads on some things, I lead on some other things, John leads on, there is no fixed hierarchy. And we're flexible in the way that we kind of resource stuff. And we're part of that cooperative technologist network of 40, 50 co-ops who we can pull on. We don't have to hire someone. Yes, we have collaborators and whatever, but we can just, get in touch with our friends. They come in, help us on a very specific thing, whatever. We don't have to expand. We're not trying to it's a bit like when you work in teaching, you get to a certain level and you have to go into administration or be a manager or whatever. Oh, you're really good at teaching? Well, let me give you a completely different job to do. It's a bit like that when you run an organization that isn't like ours. If you're trying to just build a business, you end up just being a business person and running a business and not doing the work. And whereas we want to do the work. And I think that's the difference there. Yeah, but the hierarchy thing is particularly important to us because it's all about agency and trying to make sure that we collaborate together on the same level with one another, recognizing each other as human beings rather than one person as the boss, which is a bit weird.
And possibly people can somehow, even if they are in a hierarchy, they can perhaps informally like operate like this, under the giant arc, because it's certainly possible to make those connections. And what you're describing made me think of like what instead of leadership being like this role or this like actual thing of power, is that in the community space, people earn it through reputation and doing the positive work and not always being the loud person in the community space. And that's really hard to get people to think about other ways they can contribute. And so,
and taking two of our themes together so far, kind of social media and what we've just been talking about there, I always think that like thought leadership is neither thought nor leadership. It's kind of just content with people who often, and like I'm not trying to generalize too much, but often people who wish they could be leaders and don't have much leadership ability at the moment or whatever. I think anyone can become a leader, like desperately hoping that they could as they type from their parents' basement. So I think that leadership is something that you can learn. I think the thought bit of it really needs like in-depth research, practitioners doing stuff, sharing their work, working openly, rather than someone just, retyping a Forbes magazine article for kind of status or kudos on LinkedIn. That would be a nice thing to do.
And so like, We Are Open is just this big, happy collaborative where you sit around and smile. You never have arguments, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Doug and I definitely do not fight like brother and sister sometimes.
I can't see that. Well, I really want to thank you both for being able to jump into my unstructured format. It's been a pleasure, and mostly what we're bringing to me is like there's communities we think about, ones that are identified, and then there's like the ones that are developed over time between communities. And like I don't know if there's even a name for that, but to me that's what's been the most valuable part of this work, and it happens over such a long stretch that you don't even realize it. And so, I mean, that's what enabled me to reach out to you and say like, hey, do you mind giving me an hour of your time to share your wisdom for some podcast, for some organization? But
yeah, and we want to get you on our podcast as well.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
What you've just described there with the different communities of practice, what Participate have been talking about recently is landscapes of practice and different communities of practice kind of joining together within a wider landscape of practice, which is basically what I think we have all been part of over the last 15, 20 years.
I just want to say thank you for listening to yet another episode of OEG Voices. And this is a podcast that I help produce at Open Education Global. And there's going to be some featured open license music. And I always pick something from the Free Music Archive. And I found a track called Together by O Fron Ducar. Like Lars, like, I know them. I'm just kidding. It's licensed Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike. And so I love like making use of the Free Music Archive. And so you'll find this episode at our site, voicesoeglobal.org. And if you want, follow us up in conversation with Doug and Laura in that OEG Connect community space that we mentioned. And so I'd be happy to continue this conversation in your podcast. And so I'd like to do that. So thank you both, Doug and Laura, for coming on to the show today.
Thanks so much for having us.